You're watching Network Radio. Live from the Media Broadcasting Center.
Okay, so we're gonna take the second half of this show, and we're gonna start going through some of these cases that I found. The first one's gonna hit home for you, Eric. It took place right in Detroit. I'm talking about 7-year-old Ayana Monet Stanley Jones, 7 years old, was shot and killed by Detroit police inside of her home. The hit TV show 48 Hours, or the first 48, was being televised while this took place. Obviously, this episode didn't air. The police came into the home with a no-knock raid. They were looking for where they thought was a killer was in the home, and found Ayana sleeping on the couch with her grandmother. They came with the gun. According to the story, the grandma kind of pushed the gun away, and the gun just accidentally went off and shot and killed Ayana, who was sleeping, 7 years old, and it was declared a mistrial. The police officer never got any recommendation for it, so that was considered a mistrial, and I'm sure you can see her picture up on the screen. Beautiful little girl, never got a chance to even see her 8th birthday because of this raid. Very, very tragic story. That one hit hard, obviously, because I've got I've got little kids too, and but yeah, I want you guys to really keep in mind that I will remind you at the end of every article that we talk about which police have gotten consequences and which haven't. This was considered a mistrial, so this guy's still on the force, and that took place. I don't even know the date on that one, but I do believe it was 2014, maybe, or 2012. It was in the last. Right. Yeah. Second one is Brian Garber, who's a 28-year-old white male living in Lexington, Ohio. Brian's father called the police. He was having a conversation with Brian. Brian was suffering from very bad depression. Had mentioned to his dad basically that he really didn't want to live anymore. His dad thought that he had a gun or something, that he was going to hurt himself, so he wanted to send the police over there to get Brian some help. Police showed up and ended up going right into the house, went into Brian's room and shot him 14 times.
14 times. Wow.
And killed him. He was married and had 2 children, and wouldn't you know it, there was no gun found at the scene.
14 times.
14 times in his bedroom. We, in 2012 in Houston, there's a guy named Brian Klonich, 45 years old, also a white male. He was a double amputee, suffering from schizophrenia, and was confined to a wheelchair. And he was shot by officers inside of a group home that he was living in. Apparently, the story is that Brian had a pen.
Remember that one too.
And was putting an officer's life in jeopardy with this pen. Keep in mind, he has one arm and one leg, and confined to a wheelchair, and he was shot to death inside of that group home. And they reckon that it was anywhere between 7 and 12 rounds that they pumped into him and took his life. A pen, wow. Apparently.
Yep, I remember that one too.
This is the newest one here that everybody's talking about right now. Eric Garner, black male, lived in New York on July 17th, 2014. There's videos that show that he was trying to break up a fight. The police had been harassing him quite a bit about selling untaxed cigarettes, and which he was.
Lucy.
Basically, he went over, the cop went over to him, and he was basically dumb. He was a big guy, and he was telling him, why do you guys keep harassing me? I'm not selling anything. The kid that's got the surveillance video saying he was just trying to break up a fight. He was just trying to break up a fight. It looked to me, and I couldn't get an exact count of how many officers there were, but it looked like there was anywhere between 7 and 10 of them. One of the officers put him in a chokehold, put him to the ground, and killed him. Yes, he had asthma and he had some heart conditions, but the main problem with this is there was no indictment. The chokehold was actually banned from the New York Police Department. So it was an illegal, illegal excessive force. And 11 times you can hear Garner yelling, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe." No indictment, which just took place. So this police officer and the rest of it, they're just doing their job. No big deal. End of story. And this is the one that I was telling you about. If you go on that police1.com, you'll see all the police officers having a good time talking about it, patting each other on the back, high five and whatnot. Sad situation. Obviously, there's been protests going on about that, and was so close to Ferguson taking place. You can see where the martial law, this stuff, you're going to get used to it because we're going to see stories like this all the time. The only difference is you're not going to hear about the white victims as much because let's face it, they don't stir up enough controversy, and you won't get as many riots. If you want to bust people that are white for getting into riots, you'll find us. We tend to torch cars and burn our cities down when our favorite basketball team wins a championship. The fifth case is Jason Westcott, 29 years old, a white male, May of 2014. Police suspected Jason to be a drug dealer. Okay. Somebody had threatened Westcott. He was threatened by an acquaintance. And he called the police, and the police told him, to get a handgun. And if somebody ever invades your home, to shoot to kill, that he has that right to do that. He ends up getting a handgun. And a couple weeks later, a SWAT team barreled through his door. Westcott was woken up out of a sound sleep with it, went to grab for his gun. And when he did, they unloaded over 100 rounds into Westcott, into his home, shot and killed him. Over 100 rounds fired. No drugs were found in the home, of course, during this drug raid, and no charges were filed on the police. I find that one a little interesting for the simple fact that they instructed him to get a gun 2 weeks before they killed him. Keith Vidal, 18 years old, another white male, a very unstable, mentally ill young man, was shot and killed by police in his home on January 5th of 2014 in North Carolina. The young man's father had called the police because he was, suffering from very mental illness. He was swinging a screwdriver at his dad, telling him that he wanted to fight him with the screwdriver. Police were called. 3 officers from 3 different districts showed up. The first 2 officers got there. They were calming the situation down, the way they got it down to the point where it was actually calm, until the 3rd officer came in and shot the kid just before saying, "We don't have time for this shit," and then shot the 18-year-old and killed him. 18 years old, this kid. Okay. Michael Brown, we all know this story, 18, black male, lived in Ferguson, Missouri. On August 9th, 2014, he was shot by Darren Wilson 6 times and killed. Brown was unarmed and allegedly trying to attack Officer Wilson. There was no indictment on the charge of Officer Wilson. The claim was that he was stopped for robbing a convenience store. There's a couple problems I have with this. Number one, when he was stopped by Officer Wilson, him and his friend were not stopped for the alleged robbery, but they were stopped for jaywalking. With the scuffle that took place by the police car,
One of those good quota tickets to just add
Yep.
on top of that.
Two shots were fired. From what we were understanding or what we're hearing, that 2 shots were fired into his arm. Michael Brown then took off running. Officer Wilson followed him around the block in his car, got out of the car, and shot 4 more times with the final 2 shots, one going through the right eye socket and one going through the top of Michael Brown's head. There was no indictment, and that's pretty much why the riots took place in Ferguson. Let's see here. The list just keeps getting better. Let's go to the 8th one. We're going to talk about Oscar Grant, 22 years old, black male. Police responded to a fight outside of a BART station. Grant and his friends were standing around peacefully. A video shows this. When the cops came in, Grant raised his hands, peacefully surrendering. The video shows the police officers wrestled him to the ground. 4 officers wrestled him to the ground, put him in cuffs. One of the officers then claimed that while being handcuffed, that Grant tried to reach for a gun that he never had on him, and they never found a gun on him, and executed him by shooting him in the back and killed him. He was 22 years old. How he was going for a gun, which they said he was reaching for the front of him. Now picture you're handcuffed in the back and you're trying to get to the front. It's pretty tough to do. Either way, he was executed. No charges were filed against the officer. That's also on video. Tamir Rice, 12 years old, black male, Cleveland, Ohio, was killed by police for having an airsoft gun in a park. He was waving an airsoft gun around. A person that was sitting in a nearby pavilion called the police and said that there's a man waving a gun around. And as you can see on the picture, he does not look like a man at all. In fact, he doesn't even look like he's 12. Waving a gun around and said that it could be fake. It's probably fake. He said it was probably fake twice. The officer pulled up, and before he even got out of the car completely, he told Tamir to put his hands up. Claims Tamir went for the airsoft gun and fired 2 shots into Tamir's stomach, where he died later in the hospital. Now, the thing about this case is that the officer that shot him in 2012 worked in another city in Ohio. In 2012, he resigned because he was considered unfit for duty. He was having mental breakdowns over a girl that he had lost, an emotional breakdown. He couldn't pass any of the the gun range, the firing tests, because he would be shooting a gun while breaking down into tears and crying and the whole 9 yards. Said he didn't have any friends there, blah, 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 ends up resigning and then picks up a job right down the road, not too far from where he was let go from or where he resigned from. What I talked to Eric about earlier is that it's amazing because when I switched school districts to teach, they did a complete background check on me. How do the police not know that this cop was unfit for duty? They let him go, and they gave him a job. And now he is on paid leave while they do the investigation. He offered his condolences. So did Eric Garner's mother. Offered both of them their mother's condolences, or his wife. I'm sorry, Garner's wife. Neither one accepted the apologies of the officers, so they're considered to be thuggish parents. Let's go to the next case. This one's going to blow your mind, Eric. We're going to talk about Pearlie Golden, black female, 93 years old. On May of this year, she was gunned down in her home by Officer Stephen Stem, who claims that Pearl was brandishing a gun and shot at her 3 times and killed her in her home. I don't know too much about that story, but 93-year-old woman with gun skills, it's just kind of unlikely. But I don't know for sure. It was one of the cases that caught my attention. Some of these,
unbelievable.
Yeah, this one I know we don't have a picture for, but this is the one we already talked about in Miami, Florida. The guy that got shot with 100. It was ended up being, excuse me, not 160, but 116 rounds. The 12 officers that hit 4 civilians that we talked about. His name was Raymond Heresy, and that was in 2011. We'll move on to another one that we don't have a picture of. His name is Caldrick Donald, 24 years old, black male, unarmed, also mentally ill. In the past, Donald was picked up by the police, and many times they would pick him up and they would take him to a mental hospital where they would give him treatment. Basically, when he was having in between med changes and things, and like we had talked about before, when you're quitting a medication that you're on and you get immune to it and they switch it up, it can cause a lot of mental problems. Your body can even go into shock. You can even die from it. Basically, his mother called the police like she always does. He was refusing to take his medication. Sergeant Brown, not officer, but Sergeant Brown, shows up at the house, grabbed the boy violently. The boy broke away, or the 24-year-old broke away, started making his way down the hallway where he was tasered. Okay, he was tased. Kid ended up getting up, going towards the bathroom. The cop followed him into the bathroom. All of a sudden, there were 3 shots fired, and you could hear Mr. Donald say, "I want my mama," twice before he went silent. The mom yelled at the officer and said, quote unquote, "You shot my son." The sergeant said, "I had to." She responded, "No, you didn't." And so that young man was killed and was also mentally ill. We're going to move on to
my child. You're going to get shot, by the way.
Yeah, that was it. That's what I had. That's what I had for all the cases. That's what I had for all the cases that I thought were pretty interesting and wanted to bring up. But man, the only one that's facing any kind of investigation, the reason I said is he's not acquitted right now, is because it's brand new, and that's the killer of young Tamir, the 12-year-old. Of course, he's being investigated right now, but with this new information that came out, man, I mean, you got to hear some of this stuff that's out there. And there was an article from The Guardian, and even in this report, it said that his name is Officer Timothy Lohman, and he basically was breaking down emotionally while handling a live handgun. This is while he was working in 2012. During a training episode at a firing range, Lohman was reported to be distracted and weepy. His handgun performance was dismal, and that was coming from the deputy chief. He also talks about how he was getting less than 2 hours of sleep a night and still being put on duty. As we continue down in this article on The Guardian, which you can find, it was just posted today. You can go to theguardian.com, find this article, and it goes into deep conversation about how just emotionally distressed this guy was, how he said he had no friends, maybe I should quit. I only hang out with 73-year-old priest, he said. I've cried every day for 4 months about this girl. So basically, he was mentally, whatever the case may be. Now, this thing could go 2 ways. I can tell you how I think it's going to go. I think they're going to go ahead and acquit him and say that he was having some mental issues. Now, my response to that is, how many of the cases that I read that I talked about in this book today that I looked up of people that were mentally ill and didn't get the chance before their lives were taken? So if they're going to claim that he was mentally ill and had problems, and that was going to be the excuse, I'm going to tell you right now, people, if you're listening, because we do have lots of listeners that do join us from the Cleveland area, I'm going to tell you right now, do not let that fly. Do not stand there and take that. You definitely need to make this information known. However, I'm asking you and pleading with you, do not fall for the same trap that Ferguson, Missouri fell for. Don't start burning your houses down. If you see people that are coming in from other parts of the country that you know, and you know the neighborhood you live in, everybody pretty much knows who mostly who the regulars are around there. If you start seeing a lot of strange people you don't recognize, those people are saboteurs. They're hired by the media or they're hired by the police. They are there to get you guys to form violent protests, to get you guys to basically take another step into martial law. They're going to bring SWAT. They're going to bring the National Guard. It's going to be Ferguson, Missouri, only it's going to be happening in Cleveland. And Cleveland's much bigger, so the military is going to be much bigger. The police force is going to be much bigger. And I'm asking you, please don't fall for it. The best thing you can possibly do if you're going to protest is protest. If you see anybody that's coming in there that's going to try to wreck your neighborhood, do what they were doing in Ferguson. There's a couple businesses that were being protected by some old military and old police officer retirees that were protected. They're called the Oath Keepers. And basically form something like that. Protect your town, man. This is your town.